It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting the UN. It is not kind of any day I talk to a group like you, but nevertheless, thank you. Professor Reichmann, Professor Melnik, Mr. Shavit, Professor Ganor, ladies and gentlemen. This conference is one of the most important international gatherings devoted to counterterrorism. I'm pleased to be joined here by my fellow colleagues from New York, who lead the UN work on this issue and at our headquarters and in our partnership around the globe, including here with Israel. I have been repeatedly reminded on terrorism remains a pressing and relevant threat today. Just a few months ago, we witnessed the most serious attacks in Israel for years, attacks that I and many of the international actors were clearly and swiftly condemning. The victims joined the thousands of Israelis who have suffered the loss of loved ones or endured a life marked by injury as a result of terrorist attack. Living here, one cannot ignore the pain and trauma caused by such acts. Just as I experienced that in Norway in 2011, where my life was put in vertigo, and the devastating impact of what comes after, even for those who survive. The UN has spoken clearly and collectively on the urgent need to counter terrorism and stop violent extremism in its tracks. UN Security Council resolution provide a framework for an international response to terrorism threat. States are obliged to prevent terrorist acts and to ensure that their territories is not used for financing, planning, or facilitations of such acts. States and the territories should not be used as safe havens, and perpetrators need to be brought to justice. There is also a consensus that the morale and the ideological encouragement that terrorists receive must be addressed in parallel. Praise for such despicable acts fan the flame of extremism and must be condemned. And it's happening around us here as well. To this end, in our briefings and reports to the Security Council, the Secretary General and myself regularly condemn terrorist attacks and those who seek to glorify them, making it clear that such acts are never justified or legitimate. At the same time, we amplify voices of moderation and tolerance. I assure you that we will continue to do so. Of course, statements and resolutions in New York and policies are not enough. We need to go into the weeds and address what is really causing the acts to happen. Having worked in this region for some decades, I have witnessed how outbreaks of violence and terrorist attacks set back efforts to promote peace and sustainable development. At the same time, and as Secretary General has argued, it is abundantly clear we cannot effectively address terrorism without tackling the conditions conducive to its spread. Weak institutions, inequalities, poverty, hunger, and injustice all provide fertile ground for terrorist recruitment and violent extremism, which was the point also in the first session here today. While combating terrorism and advancing peace are distinct and separate tasks, they have a direct and immediate impact on each other. This is certainly true here in the Israeli-Palestinian context. With this in mind, I would like to share with you 3 parallel tracks on which my office is working to advance these goals. First, in line with the Secretary General's priority on preventing diplomacy, I continuously, and my team, engage with all relevant actors that are in this theater. We have a network that is broad. We actually know people that are drivers of the conflict, and in our contact with them, we develop the ability to actually address conflicts when it comes up, and we work to stop it. We have been deeply involved in the recent escalations that took place in Gaza in August, and also the ones that took place last year in May. And it is based on the contacts we have developed and the capacity we have to talk to people and the capacity we have to interact with people here, in Egypt, in US, and in the region, that we can, as a UN team, play a part not only in the de-escalation, but also in setting the theme and direction for the day after. Second, with a view to the long term, we aim to foster conditions that will allow for meaningful movements towards addressing outstanding issues in a conflict. This means asking the parties to refrain from unilateral steps that undermine prospects for peace. It means urging them to actively reject violence and incitement while encouraging positive steps that will improve conditions on the ground. Internationally, third, the UN plays a key role in developing a coherent and consistent diplomatic approach to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. In this context, engaging with regional countries is critical to our diplomatic efforts. But we have actually lost one of the platforms that we used for this purpose as a fallout of the ongoing conflict in Europe with Ukraine. For the moment, the work of the Middle East Quartet is in suspension, and it may remain so until further notice, and it may take time. I have, in this situation, after talks with the Secretary General, moved more proactively into exactly that shaping format of events. With this in mind, let me move to the situation on the ground. Why? I mean, I have been in and out of Gaza since Operation Summer Rain. I have been in before, I've been in after, I've tried to stop some of these conflicts to occur. Just before Christmas in 2008. I've been in the weed in 2012, in 2014, and back now here over the last years. Gaza remains fragile in one sense, and it has to do with the unpredictability of the context we are operating in. What can drag a stable, reasonably stable Gaza yet back into the theater again is what may happen or not happen at Al-Aqsa. I think we should not underestimate the Al-Aqsa link on the stability of Gaza and West Bank. But I also think that the dynamics that has been developed in Gaza gradually since 2014 is a smart one, And it's in a way a counterfactual logic to the policy applied back to 2008. And the point is that it works faster and with less hostility. Far more needs to be done along the lines that are now being put forward and applied from the Israeli side, with the broad support from the international community. But we have more steps to go before I declare Gaza stable. I'm not doing that now. West Bank. What is being applied in Gaza cannot necessarily be applied the same way at the West Bank because of the complexities of the situation, the changing and ever-changing dynamic on the ground, the differences between the different populated areas, and the very fact that we at the West Bank do have friction zones internally at the West Bank that does not exist in Gaza. In these friction zones, we have clashes between villages and settlers. In these friction zones, we have incursions. In these friction zones, we have attempts to kill soldiers from Israel. In these friction zones, run by young guys, on both sides, run by young guys, that is where the escalation is taking place. We will not be able to change this tide unless we get the Palestinian Authority back on track institutionally, financially, and when it comes to credibility and support. But I just raised the question whether this not may be the time to look at the West Bank also from a counterfactual perspective and see whether methodology to stabilize the West Bank really works, or if we have to look in different direction and start different discussions. I might think that is needed. In closing, allow me to emphasize that despite of these mounting concerns, a widespread outbreak of violence is not a foregone conclusion, even in the middle of an escalation at the West Bank. I think that if we can go together on tangible positive steps and reforms and get them implemented, if voices calling for tolerance and moderation are amplified, and if we can, in a smart way, create a meaningful framework for a political process between the parties, negative trends may be pushed back. But charting a constructive way forward in a situation of deep mistrust and daily violence certainly is not an easy task. And I will remind, at my very end of this presentation, the following. It was in the midst of a very constructive and dynamic phase of the talks between Israel and PLO that we got as a reply for those who wanted to destroy it, a wave of suicide attacks inside Israel that blocked the whole thing and derailed it. So there is no guarantee that politics may push back terrorism. That's why we have to kind of have at least two thoughts in the head at the same time when we're applying this methodology. But my firm concern is that we have to reset that framework to get into a different paths where we can deal with terrorism in a more constructive atmosphere. Thank you so much.